Be honest with me. How many of you out there are listening to this after a long day of wearing a metaphorical mask all day at work, pretending to be a version of yourself that fits with societal expectations? How many of you are like me and you've been wearing that same mask around for the past 20 some years because if you were to just be yourself, you don't think you would have made it this far? And maybe you desperately want to just get to a place of being yourself again, but you can't even fathom feeling safe enough to do it. How do we get to a place in our lives where we feel safe enough to just be yourself again after decades of pretending to be someone else because that's what we thought would get us ahead in life? That is what we're talking about today. Millennials and masking. If you are new here, I am so thrilled to have you. Welcome to your new safe space. I am your host and new bestie, Peter Goose, former teacher turned burnt-out corporate millennial turned millennial burnout mindset coach after doing a crap ton of inner work and learning all I could about the brain and the mind and the body. And now I'm here to share my journey with a mission to help as many of my fellow millennials besties to reprogram your mind and rediscover yourself. So I heard this quote a while back that said something like, every time that you experience trauma, there's a small part of you that breaks off and stays stuck there in that moment of your past. Let that sink in for a second. Because in order to move forward, you are forced to adopt new protective mechanisms to stay safe going forward. Like, holy crap, it all just made so much more sense. Because think about it, right? As a generation of 90s kids that experienced so much drastic change and even trauma in a short period of time, from, Columbine to 9/11 to multiple recessions, the list goes on. We haven't had really much of a choice in all this. The drastic changes and threats to our well-being means that we've had to become this unrecognizable version of ourselves in order to fit in with societal expectations. The part of us that's really truly us, our truest, most authentic selves, we had to separate from that version time and time again and put up our masks and armor just to get by. And it makes me think too, right? Like, no wonder so many millennials are getting labeled and diagnosed with neurodivergence as fully grown adults. Not because there's anything wrong with us, but because we're all trying to pretend to be this imposter version of what we think will get us ahead and never feel comfortable enough to just be ourselves. Which, as you can imagine, could probably do some pretty strange things to your brain over time. But here's the thing, besties. This is the first big awareness, and this was a biggie for me. We wear the mask for one reason, because it keeps us safe. Or at least that's what we make ourselves believe. Because this same mask that we're wearing around 12 plus hours a day has gotten you to where you are today. Sure, could you have gotten here without it? Maybe, but the mask on has worked already. So why would you try out something different when you're already living in a state of survival mode? You spent so long relying on these protective mechanisms that it's become comfortable. It's become part of your comfort zone. And while your comfort zone might not be too terribly comfortable right now, at least it's kept you safe. As humans, we will always prioritize safety over happiness. If we're ever going to feel safe enough to be more ourselves and less our masks, we have to acknowledge why we've been doing it this way in the first place. And as hard as this may be to hear, to approach it from a place of gratitude, to recognize how this mask has benefited you and kept you safe all these years. Here's the thing, friends. When you experience things like a multitude of recessions and stages of economic hardship, fear begins to rule our life. We fear getting fired or laid off. We fear that we won't be able to pay our bills. We fear that things might get even worse. And when those fears arise, we revert back to what we've known worked before through the subconscious. Everything that we've learned about life up until right now, we rely on patterns from our past that seem to work out well for us. And for millennials, based on how we were raised and conditioned from childhood, there's a few unconscious behaviors that have become patterns of our past. So number one, we become people pleasers and the no worries guy or girl, because when others are happy, you stay safer. That's what we learned. Number two, we work more hours and say yes to extra work because you've learned that when you're an overachiever, you stay safer. And we make sure that there's a smile on our face when we turn on our Zoom cameras on meetings. Just like when we were kids, right? Society told you that you shouldn't let others see your emotions. That's weak. So we plaster on a smile and we put on our best show. It's this millennial mentality that keeps us safe. We stuff it down and we smile anyways because it's fine. I'm fine. Everything's fine. You force yourself to go beyond your limits because you've learned time and time again that when you do, it gets us the validation and approval from others, and oftentimes gets us by in life. You feel like you are enough. And the reward of feeling like you're enough is one of the greatest motivators out there. And when you do feel safer and like you are enough because of those behaviors, it gets reinforced by your brain as a stronger and stronger neural network until it becomes habituated. Just like driving. You don't even think about it anymore. It's just ingrained in your brain that this is the way that you do it. And those same fears have more and more power over us as we seek out evidence to confirm them as true. So again, it's done its job. It has done its job to keep you safe. But now, and you know this deep down, now it's keeping you stuck. You've been this way maybe for so long that this mask has now become your identity. When someone says, "Tell me about yourself," where do most of us go first? Our job, the title. We've made what we do become who we are. And because maybe you've been like this for so long that you've even forgotten that part of you that got stuck behind 10 or 20 years ago, where you feel like you've literally lost yourself. And y'all, I'm telling you, this is exactly where I was about 4 years ago. I personally had this kind of turning point during the pandemic when we were all quarantined. And, you know, let's just be honest, it's just us millennials. How many of us actually secretly miss quarantine? Because all that alone time allowed us in that brief moment in time to rediscover the version of yourself that got left behind. And don't get me wrong, even though the pandemic was absolutely horrible, right? Heartbreaking, we were forced to spend more time alone. And in all that time by myself, I started trying out new hobbies. I was baking bread and I was making homemade candles and crocheting like a grandma. And even though I didn't fully realize it at the time, I look back and I see now how much I was able to get my spark of creativity back. It gave me something to be passionate about again. And it reminded me of all of the hobbies and passions that I used to have even as a kid that I had completely forgotten about. Like, I remember as a young child, like finding such a sense of solitude and peace when I would be out in the woods, like building forts by myself and just walking around like I owned the place. And so, you know, during quarantine, I started hiking more and taking more getaways to the mountains to just get out into nature. Even in a time where the world was falling apart, I was experiencing this weird sense of calm and healing. But then, like, quarantine was over, which, you know, wasn't a bad thing by any means, but we were just kind of expected to go back like everything was normal again. And after that time where maybe you were able to rediscover a bit of yourself with the mask off, you had to put it right back up again, armor back on, because who knows what next unprecedented historical event is up next around the corner. That's the thing that really keeps us stuck inside this box, I think. We're so busy trying to just keep up with the reactions to life happening all around us that we don't have the capacity for creation. Maybe you're already at or even beyond this point where you actually pause and analyze your return on investment on this mask. Yes, it's kept you safe in the past, but what's the reward you're getting from it now? I like to think about this like the concept of motivation, because fascinating, brain science here for you. Motivation happens when our brain sees the reward as worth the effort. So rewind back to when we're like 22 years old, right? We're fresh out of college and we expect that with 10 years of hard work, we're going to be able to afford that house and save for retirement and take vacations. So, we follow the directions. We work really, really hard. And then right when you think you're finally getting somewhere, you get knocked down by the latest global economic crisis or inflation caused by really stupid elderly men in government that have only their own interests in heart. And now, maybe you're sitting here in your 30s or 40s and starting to question, like, is all this hard work and masking up all day really worth it anymore? The goalposts just seem to keep moving. And if this mask can no longer even guarantee my safety, then what am I doing here? Because now I don't feel safe or happy. And if my safety and security is always going to be in question, then perhaps it's not worth all the extra energy it requires to put on this facade to pretend to be a version of yourself that fits with this narrative of hustle culture and societal expectations. And how much energy might I have left over to focus on those things when I don't have to use up all my energy on trying to pretend to be a different version of myself? Those are all the questions that really got me started down this road and, rabbit hole. But, it's not that simple and easy, right? The moment that you try to lower down your mask and armor, all those same fears creep back up. Are they still going to like me? Will I get fired? And most importantly, will they still see me as enough? Now, listen, I'd say don't worry about what others think, but let's just be real. We all worry about what others think about us on some level or another as humans. Instead of, just ripping it all off and throwing your middle finger up at society, here's where I would begin. 3 things. Number 1, test the fear. Is what you've made yourself to believe to be true in the past still true today? Remember when you were a kid and you didn't want to go up in the attic or down to the dark basement because there was clearly a monster living there? And then one day, brave little you decided to take a peek. And you cautiously looked around, waiting for something to, jump out at you. But it didn't. And in that moment, the fear lost its power. Fear gets its power by our not looking. So maybe you have that fear that if you don't check your email first thing in the morning, you're going to miss something big. And your mind creates this, worst case scenario that says, but what if there's a huge dumpster fire happening right now, right this minute, and you don't even know about it? And if you don't check your email right now, bad things will happen. So this eventually spirals, of course, into the narrative that makes you believe that you will lose your job if you do not check your email the moment you wake up. Sound familiar? And so what if just for one morning a week, you tested the fear, and instead you took a long walk, or you treated yourself to a little iced coffee and avocado toast first. And then after realizing that the world did not, in fact, end, you can maybe do this 2 or 3 or 4 times a week until you feel safe enough where the fear no longer keeps you hostage to being that perfectionist, people-pleasing version that has burnt you out all these years. When we face that fear head on, it instantly loses its power over us. So, start small. Start small. Test the fear in ways that still feel lower risk and safer. And then over time, you'll be able to give yourself permission to test out some of those other fears that really keep you stuck. And then here's number 2. After you've tested the fear, you've got to replace the old with the new, because all of those fears are directly linked to the subconscious, and specifically your beliefs. You have this fear, right, that if you don't always do more and say yes, that you're gonna get fired. And that fear is tied back to a subconscious belief that says, in order for me to make it out here, I always need to be the hardest worker in the room. It is that same mindset that makes us believe that our level of worth has a direct correlation to our level of productivity. And if those beliefs go unchecked, then your mind will just continue to seek out evidence to confirm the validity of them. So then the question becomes, right, what's the alternative? What are the beliefs that would actually serve you? Maybe it's as simple as shifting the belief to I'm enough, regardless of how much I accomplish. And this is going to be really freaking uncomfortable at first because it goes against all of your programming up until this point. I do this all the time in work meetings, when I get on a Zoom call and I feel myself instantly wanting to put up the mask, and I kind of catch myself in those moments. And I'm like, okay, whatever I just said was not at all me. It was the masked up version of me talking because it was seeking validation and approval and safety. And so, it's in those small individual moments like that where I can test out the new belief system. What if I just speak up and say what's true for me in this moment? What if instead of saying yes and smiling like I normally would, what if I finally take a stand for my own mental capacity? Just like affirmations, when you commit to adopting this new system of beliefs in your mindset, your mind is going to go in search of evidence to confirm it. It's not going to be easy at first. But when you give yourself more and more of those little moments to lower down the mask and just be a human being instead of a human doing, and you realize, just like that light in the attic, that it's not as scary as it seemed, your mind will begin to accept it more and more as a possibility, more and more as a truth. Your mind just needs a new set of directions to go off of. Think about, your conscious mind. Your conscious mind is the goal setter, and your subconscious is the goal getter. When you set an intention for a different way of thinking and living, your subconscious takes in all that data and over time begins to write a new program, a new algorithm that allows you to see evidence in your surroundings of the new belief becoming part of your reality. So again, number 1, test the fear. And then number 2, have a new belief to replace the old belief that fear stems from. And then number 3, this is the other biggie, separate who you are from what you do. Let me just go a step further here. How can you infuse who you are into what you do instead of forcing what you do to become who you are? The next time that you introduce yourself to someone, your challenge is to start with something about you, anything about you besides work. Start re-embracing old passions and goals. Remember, you were told at some point in time, when you were thinking about what you wanted to do when you grew up, and you said, I will have this big dream, but everybody just kind of laughed and said, oh, that's cute, but that's not going to pay the bills. Go do that thing. Maybe you don't quit your job and do that thing, but if your dream was, I don't know, to become a movie star, then get into your local theater community. If you're like me and you wanted to become a motivational speaker as a teenager, then hey, get on TikTok or Instagram. Start sharing your journey. Start sharing who you are and start showing up for the version of yourself that got stuck in the past. Because they are still there, believe you me. And, maybe life isn't about finding yourself. Maybe it's more about rediscovering yourself, rediscovering the most authentic version of you that ever existed the day that you were born. And then everything since then has just been conditioning, right? Go back. Look at old pictures or videos of yourself if you have them as a young child. When I did this, I had some of the best cries of my life because I started to remember the parts of myself that I neglected for so long. And when you decide to unshackle yourself from whatever it is that you want to call it, right? The matrix or just society's conditioning and expectations, you begin to remember that OG version of you. Small pieces of your personality begin to shine through again after being covered up for decades because it didn't help you get ahead. And over time, believe you me, it takes time. You start to realize that not only are you happier, but you also start feeling more safe to be this version of yourself more and more. This is what I mean when I say you are the new parent to your brain. It's been conditioned, but it can be reconditioned and reprogrammed. And you can either let everyone else be at the controls, or you can take back the controls. When you do, believe you me, besties, not only do you start feeling safer, but that inner child that got stuck in their trauma 20 years ago, they also feel safer. Because who you are becoming is the parent that they always needed. Let's just be real, since it's just us millennials here. We're pretty fucking awesome. Sure, we might have a weird sense of humor and maybe a little weird all around, but let's own it. Let's own it instead of running away from it. Because in case you needed to hear this as a reminder, you are enough without having to pretend to be someone else. If you like what you heard, be sure to share with one of your millennial besties that could use the message and reminder so we can spread this word and continue creating this amazing community of support and healing. And don't forget to follow or subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. And I hope to see you next time on the Millennial Reset.